Welcome to Automotive EV. My name is Peter Wooding, and thank you for joining us. Our next session, Impact of COVID-19 on EV, is a keynote presentation by Arthur Kipferler, Partner and Managing Director UK for Berylls Strategic Advisors. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Arthur. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having us, and good morning to everybody who is listening in, probably a little bit around the world. Since we are not McKinsey or BCG, let me introduce our company first in a few minutes. We are a consulting boutique, specifically working only in the automotive and mobility industry. We were set up in Munich about 10 years ago and now have offices around Europe, in Korea, in China, and in the United States. And most of our business actually is with car makers, but we also work with mobility providers, obviously automotive suppliers, cities, for example, on mobility concepts, and investors in the industry from private equity to family offices. Myself, I spent about 30 years in the automotive industry. I started off as a junior consultant in the Boston Consulting Group. I went on there to work mostly for German OEMs and some Asian ones, and later on was the global head of the automotive practice. In 2002, I then left and joined Toyota in Toyota Motor Europe, the head office for the European region. I worked 3 years there, then moved to the Czech Republic. So I ran a sales company there for 2 countries, and then moved on during the financial crisis to the United States. After Toyota, I worked for Inchcape, for BMW, and for Jaguar Land Rover until in 2017. I finally got tired of being an OEM executive and went back to consulting, joined Berylls Strategic Advisors, and set up the UK office for them. So that much introduction should suffice. You can ask any questions afterwards, and obviously always contact me through the platform or through LinkedIn whenever you want to know something. So now let's turn to the subject of the day, impact of COVID-19 on EV. Obviously, COVID-19 has an impact on everything, and like many of you, I'm probably very tired already of hearing speeches and presentations and articles about the impact of COVID-19 on X, Y, and Z. Nevertheless, since we're in this industry and since electrification has been our most important topic before COVID, it's interesting to discuss what's going to happen actually. Let's step back one little bit and see where we came from. Obviously, we had structural problems in the industry before, so it's not that it was all paradise and COVID came and destroyed it. Our industry has been in trouble quite consistently. From an investor's perspective, you can clearly say they had lost the trust. So what you see on the blue line is a sales volume of a bunch of companies that you see on the left bottom. So basically the traditional market leaders in the industry. Not really a big catastrophe, so around 30 million units in vehicle sales. But if you look at their market cap between 2014 and 2019, a huge drop from $380 billion to $300 billion. So trust was lost. I mean, it's not that they lost a lot of profitability. It's not that the industry shrank. It's not that many things really turned over, but still, investors' trust was lost. Investors' trust was lost because of all the underlying things going on, be it case, be it Chinese startups, be it electrification especially. So definitely a lot of catch-up to be done in our industry. Then COVID came, and with COVID came the lockdowns. And in Toyota, we always used this old picture. You've probably seen it in little cartoons, where you let the water out of a canal to expose the rocks at the bottom of the canal, making it much more difficult to navigate. And this is basically what COVID has done to the whole industry. It reinforces the structural problems, and it makes sure that weaknesses that were there before are much more exposed. And specifically, I want to talk about 2.5 things that happened because of COVID, and they're very much related to electric vehicles, the topic of this conference. What we see with COVID, obviously, it has a two-way effect on many things. It reduces certain things and it reinforces other things. So if we first talk about customer behavior in terms of mobility, clearly COVID is reducing the usage, the tendency, the preponderance of customers to use shared mobility. We see that later in survey data. And it has, in the short term at least, very much reduced new and used car sales, simply because most of the stores were closed in many countries. On the positive side and the reinforcement side, it definitely increases the preference for private cars. In a wider sense of consumer behavior, it definitely has reduced the need and the willingness to travel. Many of us have gotten used to working from home, don't travel to work anymore. Many business trips have been cancelled. We learned to do everything by Teams, just like this conference. It obviously also reduces the ability to spend, because people have had a reduction in income, and if it's only bonus, they are lucky. A lot of people will obviously still lose their jobs. On the other hand, COVID has really reinforced e-commerce and deal seeking, and those two obviously go hand in hand. In general, on the industry, the pressure on profitability that was there before has been reinforced by COVID, because obviously revenue was lost and discounts have gone up in many countries. On the other hand, and which is important for electric vehicles, the availability to fund new investments in the business has been reduced, because many companies obviously had to tighten the belt. The two things we don't want to cover today, I just want to mention them here. The industry had very highly globalized supply chains, and COVID has further reduced movement to freer trade, which before obviously Mr. Trump's feud with Xi Jinping didn't really help. But definitely now, with many borders closed and logistics a lot more difficult, global supply chains have been exposed as more burden. At the same time, COVID-19 has reinforced the problems that we had with overcapacity, with all the global interdependencies. Again, as we said before, lowered the water in the canal. And then, very important for car companies in general, and all of us obviously, COVID definitely has taught us new ways to work remotely, much more flexibly. And it has also basically killed attrition, because with the labor market under stress, people are not leaving their jobs. So at least there's a positive for automotive manufacturers. In order to look into the first two, we've done a survey with about 3,000 consumers focused on China, the US, and Germany. In May, so in the middle of lockdown in all these countries. We asked the people a number of questions. Obviously, first of all, are you worried about your job? Have you already lost your job? How fast do you think your economy will recover? We also asked them, what influence did this have for your car purchase considerations? Are you going to delay your car purchases? Will you buy a cheaper or a more expensive car? Third complex of questions was, what kind of car are you going to buy? Powertrain, body type, size, and the fun chart is the one on the brand. And lastly, we explicitly dug down into their purchase intention for electric vehicles. Has COVID done something to that? It's obviously not a direct correlation, in infectious disease and the powertrain choice of your vehicle, but we wanted to know if there's something going on there that either helps or hinders electric vehicle spread. Now, surprisingly enough, we clearly saw an increased interest in BEVs, in battery electric vehicles. You see the data for China on the right, huge increase. 77% of the respondents said they are now more interested than before in electric vehicles. Germany and the US almost on the same level, still 30% higher, but also 23% less interest. And then half of the people with no change. And then we obviously asked, why are you now more interested in electric vehicles? And it's the three reasons are probably closely interrelated. So at the bottom is always, I expect a larger discount on EVs, because probably things are going on. One thing going on is, I expect government incentives to go up, which will then in turn obviously make my electric vehicle cheaper. But still, both in the US and in China on number one, and in Germany on number two, I actually care more about the environment now. So it's not really easy to explain what happened to people, but maybe being at home, being in lockdown, hearing the birds sing outside, not traveling by train every day to work, made people more concerned about the environment. And they actually put this high up on their consideration list in terms of their next car purchase. We then asked them, those people in the sample, and admittedly the sample size here was not very big, it was a few handful of people, because obviously in our age group car ownership is pretty spread. But we asked those people who didn't own a car if they would now be more likely to actually buy a car. And again, in China, a huge increase in the people who say yes now because I don't want to be on shared transportation anymore. I'm actually much more willing to consider buying my own vehicle. And that certainly is a little bit of a boost that we can find in the car markets around the world, that actually it will get people who had already gotten rid of their car, mostly urban people, to actually think again. And it even happens with my own colleagues. We have a few people now who says, well, I'm really thinking about getting a car, although I was part of the generation that thought I can live with shared mobility as my main means of transportation. The other complex of questions obviously is what does it do to your vehicle purchase intentions? And here I find that really good news. The vast majority of our respondents said back then, maximum 6 months delay. And very few, the top bar is almost invisible on all 3 regional graphs, said I will not buy a car anymore. A small minority said I will postpone my purchase by more than 1 year, but 70 to 84% actually said within 6 months. And in fact, we actually do see that now in the markets that have reopened. Registrations are back, Google searches are back to pre-pandemic levels. Some markets even had a little bit of an after effect in terms of catch-up demand, and they even had sales increases over last year. But I think this is, we don't need to be all pessimistic. This is really good news for us that actually most of the people hung on to their purchase intentions. And then, as I said before, the interesting question here is, what car are you going to buy? And then, not surprisingly, statistically, so what you see here is versus the car they own, what would be the other brand? And obviously, Tesla in the current population is a very low sample size, so Tesla has huge increases. But we also, for example, see that Mercedes is a big winner, that in China, BYD, as the electric car manufacturer, is a big winner. Overall, a tendency towards premium. Obviously, we have to discount it a little bit because people have aspirations and dreams and then not always are able to follow up with it. But also a number of loser brands. Now, if you take Germany and you see Renault here at minus 34% purchase intention in our survey, obviously, when the incentive actually came in, 10,000 euro cash incentive on an EV, and Renault Zoe being the only one really available, that gave Renault a big boost. And therefore, what we see here on this chart was intention. And then when the actual deal happens, people obviously act slightly differently. And for me, the key lesson also from this last few months was a huge confirmation of the assumption that electric car purchases are mostly driven by government incentives more than anything else. People react very sensitively to any tax saving they can have, to any cash bonus from the government. And wherever electric vehicles have been heavily incentivized, demand has gone up. In the US, where the incentives are being wound down, we will not see a big recovery of electric vehicles, even if you have this big Tesla increase here based on a low sample size. Very quickly to the other 2 aspects, what's going to happen in terms of development? We will definitely have savings, belt tightening in the companies. And the question for them is, how do they manage their portfolios, their R&D portfolios, and how are they going to live with the insecurity, the uncertainty around EV adoption? There will be really strong regional differences. Everything in the US points at a slowdown on EV growth. There's really not much reason to buy one, no incentives, cheap fuel, rolled back environmental regulations. But in markets in Europe where we had incentives, and also in China where there's still a strong push for electrification, we will see strong growth. And then lastly, in terms of the whole R&D portfolio, the ability to invest, we personally think in our company, EV will not be cut. Car manufacturers will have to continue to develop their future electric vehicles. They've all announced savings, and they are much more likely to take out a few ICE powertrain variants if they have to cut down on R&D, and even take down low-selling models, low-margin models. But the whole EV push has basically gone over the tipping point and cannot be stopped anymore. So as a summary, I would say the impact of COVID-19 on EVs is a bit of a mixed bag, but overall not negative. In some countries, through the mechanism of recovery, economic subsidies and incentives, it gave EVs a huge boost. And through, I think, people just stepping back, slowing down a bit during the lockdown, the whole importance of lower emissions and environmental protection has also gone up in the priority scale of people's minds, and that's another positive factor for EVs. So overall, a slight plus from COVID for electric vehicles. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Arthur. Great presentation, and exactly to time, really, so thank you very much. Anyone has any questions for Arthur or colleagues, please use the platform, send in the information. Arthur, will we be able to distribute the slides if people want?
Yes,
Okay.
You have them as an email. I can convert it into a PDF and send it to you. Then You can distribute it.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time. Great presentation. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.